Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. You were saying?
Welcome to episode 158 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Tonight, as always, I am joined by Darren, the most awesome Civil War nerd I know. And I am just his co-host, Mary, who cannot do an intro to save my life. And I keep telling him that, but he doesn't listen and he insists that I do this every other episode. So here we are. I apologize.
You were up all night long preparing for that. Absolutely fantastic.
I can't do like, I am just a such and such named Mary.
Well, you just have no creativity. That's the problem with
I know.
you. Anyway, so what's going on, Mary? How are you doing on a rainy Friday night here, post-Halloween?
Yeah, well, it's good to be back. And yes, we were 1 week post-Halloween. We had lots of trick-or-treaters to our place, which was awesome to see. And yeah, we are back here recording. I'm happy to be at episode 158, 2 away from 160. And tonight we are actually going to go back to a topic we visited a few months ago, except we're zeroing in by something that we discussed about it. And I am being told that I'm not following proper protocol. And I was just about to get to that. Mm-hmm. So what are you drinking, Darren? And how are you?
100% forgot about that. Mary, thanks for asking. I really appreciate it. I am drinking, it's called Love the Drake Lager. It's from Stellwagen, Massachusetts beer. After the great Drake May, of course, the Patriot quarterback. I have no mug today, Mary. I'm drinking out of a can like a common hobo. But I didn't bring a mug today. So what about yourself? What are you drinking?
I seem to remember we had a conversation when we did our booth escape tour about the fact that nobody uses the term hobo anymore.
Oh, well.
I don't know. Anyway, I am drinking the same beer as you are, and I just have it in my, drinking it out of the can, and it's in my Civil War Breakfast Club koozie.
Yeah, you're getting kind of lax with the rules here, Mary, tonight. I'm not saying, but...
Well, I asked you how you were.
Well, you don't care. But anyway. But tonight, like you said, we are going to talk about a raid that took place near your homeland, Mary. Mm-hmm. By most accounts, this raid was a battle that was fought furthest north than any other, and that is the St. Albans Raid in Vermont on October 19th of 1864. And it's debated because some think that honor belongs to the Battle of Salineville in Ohio in July 26th of 1863 because they didn't consider St. Albans Raid a battle. Now, I would disagree.
I would too.
St. Albans was a battle, and Vermont is better than Ohio, so that's my opinion. Okay?
But the Battle of Salinsville has a connection to St. Albans as well, which I'm sure we will get to as well. And as you said, it is a battle, and many that study the Civil War will recognize hearing St. Albans Raid. They may not know the details of it since it is not something that is discussed in a lot of mainstream Civil War. It seems to just get forgotten because it's not like one of these flashy battles like Gettysburg or whatever. Now, we did discuss Canada and its role in the Civil War a few months ago. And just to reiterate, Canada in 1864 is not yet a country. It is still part of the British Empire. And while Canada took Britain's stance of remaining neutral, and most Canadians who fought would fight for the Union, there were still those who fought for the Confederacy. And in addition to this, there was also Confederate operations being conducted in Canada, especially concentrated in what is now the province of Quebec. Montreal was basically like a satellite of the Confederate government in Richmond. It's where Jeff Davis had one of his family members basically running operations in Confederacy North. And this is also where the St. Albans Raid would originate from, which is in Quebec.
Mm-hmm. No, you mentioned before about how people don't see that big of a deal, but I mean, not only did it prove that warfare was evolving outside of that traditional Napoleonic kind of military norms, but it showed maybe that how desperate the Confederacy was and had become by late 1864. Now, regardless, this raid in Vermont shined a light on the Green Mountain State and its overall importance in the American Civil War. Though despite what you think and what you mentioned earlier today, Mary, Vermont wasn't just where Ben & Jerry's ice cream was invented and where you went to juvie. Vermont has a strong history in the Union Civil War effort throughout the whole war. Now, some quick backgrounds on another tremendous New England state, by the way. 34,000 of its 350 citizens signed up to fight in the Civil War. That's 9% of its entire civilian population. Vermont enlisted 17 infantry regiments, 1 cavalry regiment, 4 light artillery batteries, and 3 companies of sharpshooters. Also, by the way, 5,000 Vermonters joined regiments in different states, including 66 black soldiers who enlisted in Robert Gould Shaw's 54th Mass. Now, Norwich University, founded in 1819, is the oldest military college in the United States, as West Point, which was founded in 1802, was primarily an engineering school. Vermont was firmly Unionist and was there in just about every battle fought in the East. And of the many quintessential New England towns in Vermont, St. Albans was actually an important transportation hub.
Yep, it was. It has. So St. Albans has a railway going through it. It's got a lot of roads, and it's got waterways as well. And it's a small town, about 15 miles or 25 kilometers from the U.S. border. It also had 3 banks in close proximity and a prosperous market, which again, as we will discuss, makes it appealing to these raiders. Now, despite Vermont's governor wanting more protection, there's also no military units in the area at this time.
Yeah, and it's a surprise. You mentioned, Governor John G. Smith was scared. Despite the fact that St. Albans was over 500 miles from the front of the war, Vermont's governor was nervous. And even though Canada was the end of the Underground Railroad, it was a hotbed, like you said, of Confederate spies, blockade runners, French clowns, Southern sympathizers, who were doing what they could to help the Confederate cause. Now, like you said, officially British Canada was, quotation fingers, neutral, but we've talked about the fun lovers like Benjamin Weir in Nova Scotia, who supported rebel activities like blockade running and cotton smuggling and the rest of it.
Well, it's pretty much the financial side of it. So you have the government taking a neutral stance. Most of the citizens are, kind of like, well, we'll agree with that, kind of neutral stance. But when it comes to, if you look at kind of the business or financial side of it, that's where you see all this shady stuff going on, especially in the island provinces like Nova Scotia, like Halifax, for example, but also Quebec is the province where the Confederacy seems to be hanging out quite a bit. John Wilkes Booth goes there a few times before he assassinates Abraham Lincoln. And it's also going to be to where John Surratt flees after the assassination as well. So It is kind of like, it's a hideout in a way, I guess, for the Confederates to go to in Quebec.
Yeah, Montreal, Toronto, Halifax, those Canadian Maritimes you mentioned were hotbeds of Confederate sympathizers. They didn't exactly say sorry for doing it either. But Vermont's Governor Smith, even though the war was going badly for the Confederates in 1864, especially late, he knew that they were desperate too. And Atlanta's gone, U.S. Grant's overland campaign's underway, General Phil Sheridan is lighting torches in the Shenandoah Valley. He feared a possible invasion from the north targeting his state. He also feared Confederate prisoners in northern prisons escaping and attacking cities far away from Virginia. And Smith was actually correct because during this time, the Confederate government was beginning to formulate a plan they called the Northern Strategy, which was to begin a series of attacks in New York and along the Great Lakes region. And also, by 1864, Confederate prisoners of war were spread all over northern prisons. We're talking places like Elmira in New York, Camp Douglas in Chicago, Camp Chase in Columbus, and of course Johnson's Island in the home of Tommy Boy, Sandusky, Ohio.
Yeah, and I think we talked about in one episode, we mentioned that when Lake Erie froze over, where Johnson's Island was, there was a few prisoners that managed to escape across it and get into Canada.
That's not Maple Leafs no, that's when hell froze over.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
You mean in 1967, the last time they won?
It's been
Thoughts and prayers.
Blue Jays, too.
Did you call them the Boo Jays?
The Blue Jays.
You called them the Boo Jays.
Yeah, beat the Yankees, I'm happy. Yeah. But in one of those prisons, Chicago's Camp Douglas, were prisoners who were caught during John Hunt Morgan's cavalry raid into the north. One of them was Bennett H. Young, a 21-year-old from Nicholasville, Kentucky. Now, Young had enlisted at age 17 as a private in Company B of the 8th Kentucky Cavalry, and he was extremely pro-sesh for his age. He was part of John Hunt Morgan's cavalry, who was very well known for how hard he trained and drilled his troopers. Now, Morgan's focus was on speed, surprise, intelligence, smooth execution, which counted on him using only the best horses he could find, too. So Young, like the rest of Morgan's raiders, learned quickly and soon became elite cavalry troopers who executed his orders flawlessly on Morgan's famous raid into the north. Now, despite all of his training, Benny Young is going to get himself captured on July 26th of 1863 near Steubenville, Ohio. And he will be sent to Camp Douglas as a guest of the city of Chicago and a prisoner of war. During his time in prison, Young formed a unit made up of fellow Morgan Raiders, captives, which he would later call the Confederate Retributors. And he used the time at Camp Douglas to basically train them to conduct similar raids to the one that they were captured under Morgan. So in April of 1864, Young, along with 5 others, they're going to escape Camp Douglas and going to make their way into Canada, where he came up with a plan, of his own to be included in those Confederate Northern strategy plans.
Yep, and he's also, so he wants to do these Canada-based raids in the United States as a means of building the Confederate treasury and also force the Union to protect their northern border, which means pulling troops likely from where Grant is currently fighting in Virginia, which is what it would mean.
Exactly. So Young's going to find himself in Montreal, where a Confederate intelligence agency network is existed, commanded by 2 men, Jacob Thompson from North Carolina and a former senator from Alabama named Clement Clay Jr. Young is going to meet with Clay at St. Lawrence Hall in Montreal, which is a hotel that was frequented by people like you mentioned, John Wilkes Booth, people like Sarah Slater. But when the Lincoln administration got wind that this hotel was a nest of Confederate spies, you know what he does? He sends Union spies up to stay there to see what they were saying, what they were doing. Here's a fun fact. The owner of the St. Lawrence Hotel, his name was Henry Hogan, he drilled a peephole in the door of his office so he could spy on them while they were spying on him. Imagine that, how that works. It's like a cartoon. But during this meeting at St. Lawrence Hall, Young told Clay about an idea he had to covertly sneak a group of raiders under his command across the border into St. Albans, Vermont, and rob those 3 banks you mentioned in town to get that Confederacy some much-needed scratch, for the war effort, right?
Yeah.
Now, Clay loved the idea. So he's going to put Young on a blockade-running boat from Nova Scotia to Bermuda and then to Richmond, where he will meet with Confederate brass to get their blessing with his plan. He'll be in Richmond. He's going to meet with the commander of the Confederate Secret Service, Judah Benjamin. And he likely met with Jefferson Davis, too. It's not documented, but I have to imagine he probably did.
Yeah, I would guess so.
The Confederate hierarchy loved his plan and made Young a first lieutenant and funded him to put together a 21-man raiding force, mostly guys who Young knew from his times at Camp Douglas. So now with the blessings of the Confederate government, he returned them all to Montreal to prepare for his raid, which would basically utilize all the training he received from John Hunt Morgan. So back in Montreal, he's going to put this group together.
Yeah.
Former veterans of Morgan's raids, such as guys like Marcus Spur and Charles Swagar and William Huntley, Squire Turner Tevis Mary, 21 total, all trained hard in the molds of John Hunt Morgan. Now, Young was the first to arrive in St. Albans, and he's going to get there October 10th of 1864, arriving via train on the Vermont-Canada Railroad at St. Albans Station. Now, the rest arrived the same way, but few at a time here and there, not to call attention to themselves. Young made it very clear, just friggin' lay low. I know you guys are excited, but just please be cool. One of the raiders, named Thomas Collins, a loudmouth, rich Irish kid from Richmond, Kentucky, he's sitting on the train, and the passengers ask him, "Hey, what are you doing in St. Albans?" He says, quote, "To burn down the town."
Yeah, that's not going to raise suspicion at the border.
But the passengers, and this is a repeating thing now, they're all going to laugh at him. When they all got into St. Albans, they stayed in different hotels. Some stayed at the St. Albans house on 60 Lake Street, including Collins. Here's a fun fact. When Collins checked in, he's that loudmouth Irishman now. Yeah. When he checks into the hotel, he walks up to the front desk, and the clerk is going to ask him, "What is your name?" He replies, quote, "Jefferson Davis from Richmond, Virginia." I mean, he's
that kid.
He is. He didn't get the memo about keeping quiet, apparently.
Well, what's interesting, too, is that I guess when they're being questioned, most of these guys, when they're being questioned, or I guess when they're crossing the border, I'm not sure if it was, I'm assuming they would question them when they crossed. They're all saying that they're part of some hunting or fishing club, like a sports club that is gathering at St. Albans and all that. And meanwhile, since Young has been there since he arrived on October 10th, he's going around St. Albans inspecting the banks as well.
Right. Well, we'll talk about that, what he does. He's interesting what he does, but they're going to stay at the American House, which is now called the Bliss American House. It's on 133 North Main Street if you've been to St. Albans. Young is going to stay at the nearby Tremont House, which he would use as his headquarters. The Tremont House is gone now, Mary, but on the site of it now is where St. Albans City Hall is. But that American House and that St. Albans House, they're still there today, and it's pretty cool. But the reason Young arrived ahead of the other 21 raiders, like you said, was he wanted to reconnoiter the area, especially finding escape routes via land from St. Albans through Franklin County back over the border again. Now, while he's in town, he's going to pretend to be a theology student from Montreal and was always seen carrying his Bible and reading it whenever he was sitting. This caught the eyes of many of the local women in town. Young was a mysterious young theology student with movie star looks, so of course the women of Vermont would be intrigued by him. One local woman who took a notice of this young theology student was Anna Brainerd, who just happened to be the wife of guess who? Governor Smith.
Yeah.
Brainerd invites Young to their St. Albans home and was asked by others if he would preach a sermon at a local church, thinking there's no evidence he actually did, but that's how well he played this part. Young also wanted to find out where he could acquire horses, because that was the key to his entire escape. He'd be able to get basically enough for the raid for the horses, but they were older and broken down because many of the area's good horses were being used by the 1st Vermont Cavalry in Virginia. So you kind of had the 1978 Dodge Dart versions of these horses.
The dollar store versions.
I mean, you weren't getting a thoroughbred,
no.
Right? So Young had been in St. Albans for about a week, and he planned that raid for Tuesday, October 18th. So he gathered his raiders in his room at the Tremont House to go over the final details. But Mary, there's a problem. There's always a problem.
There was a problem. I'm going to guess the town is going to be too busy on October 18th because it's market day.
It's market day. I wonder if they sell that horrible kale there too that you get, in any case.
Well, it is Vermont. They're very earthy, crunchy people there. They enjoy their kale.
So Vermont, St. Albans has a monthly market day. Everybody comes out into the town. And so it was packed. It was full of patrons. So he decides to postpone it now for one day. Now, anyways, overnight of the 18th, it was a typical drizzly and cold New England fall night, which led to a cold and raw morning on the 19th. It'd been rainy and cold and crappy. So around noontime on the 19th, Young was going to bring the raiders together again at the Tremont House. And when they got there, Young was actually on his knees praying when he walked in.
Wow. So he's like really playing up this part.
I don't know. But he went over the final plans and made sure, and he told them previously to wear as many Confederate items as you can. If you don't have a full uniform, wear a hat, wear a jacket, but wear something Confederate. Their targets were the 3 banks in town, all on Main Street. The First National Bank, St. Albans Bank, and Franklin County Bank, which the original building still stands today, and as a bank, it's an M&T bank.
Wow.
There you go. But the plans are all 3 banks be robbed at the same time. Each of the raiders had pistols and canisters of something called Greek fire. It's that phosphorus material that when exposed to air, it's going to catch fire. Greek fire was the same weapon used to start those hotel fires in New York City on November 25th of 1863 by those Confederate agents that failed. This is the same night that the Booth brothers were performing together for the only time at the Winter Garden, raise funds with the Shakespeares. That whole night when they were burning the hotels, that was part of that raid. But anyways, at 3 p.m., Young and his 21 raiders walked out of the Tremont House and onto Main Street in downtown St. Albans. And downtown St. Albans, that's what St. Albans is. I mean, it's a small little village. But Young is wearing a full Confederate uniform. And he's going to walk to the middle of Main Street, and he's going to yell, quote, "I take possession of this town in the name of the Confederate States of America." Everyone stopped and looked at him, and they just started laughing.
They thought it was a joke.
Yeah, they thought it was a joke, but at that very moment, those 3 teams of raiders all hit the banks. Raider William Hutchinson, he led the group robbing the Franklin County Bank. He walks up to a teller, a guy named Marcus Beardsley, and he put a pistol in his face, and he says, quote, "We are Confederate soldiers who came to burn your town. Give us all of your greenbacks." Beardsley, is going to begin to hand over the cash, hand over fist to Hutchinson. And Hutchinson's going to demand to know if they have any gold in the back. Beardsley goes, "Oh, I don't know, Dave." So he lies and says no. But Hutchinson doesn't believe him, and he put them all the employees into the vault. Beardsley remembers Hutchinson's plan to burn the town. He's going to yell, "This is murder!" Because knowing that him and his co-workers are probably going to get cooked alive in this locked vault. But Hutchinson didn't lock it, and he told him, "Listen, wait 20 minutes and then you can leave. But stay in here for 20 minutes. Similar stories came from the other two banks. And while stealing the cash, some of Young's men told the bank employees that this was in retaliation for what Phil Sheridan was doing in the valley.
Oh.
The townspeople didn't realize it at all at first, but now they realized this was no joke. And soon chaos ensued, and people are screaming, raiders firing guns on the air. It's kind of like the last scene in Blazing Saddles.
Yep.
That's kind of what it was like. Young then began to direct the raiders to start herding the locals into the town green called Taylor Park. He also posted men at the corner of Lake Street and Main Street to make sure that 100+ men working at the nearby railroad yard, just down the street, didn't hear the commotion and come out to try and stop it. It was around this time that a civilian named Linus Morrison, a 52-year-old railroad worker, ironically from Fairfax, Virginia,
Wow.
he rode up to one of the raiders when the Confederate told him to stop or he'd shoot. Morrison says, "I don't see it," meaning the gun. The rebel then said, "I'll make you see it," and then shot him.
Oh, God. And he dies 2 days later from his wounds.
He's mortally wounded. He'll die 3 days later, and he'll have the recognition of being the northernmost casualty in the Civil War. Now, the raiders, having successfully robbed all three banks, they're going to start pulling out that Greek fire to begin to torch the town. But fortunately for St. Albans, that New England wet weather saved the town because the Greek fire wouldn't light.
Wow.
Buildings are wet. And if you know that, Mary, fire doesn't catch when it's wet.
Oh, shit.
Wow. Such language. But within 30 minutes of Young proclaiming the town was in possession of the Confederacy, the St. Albans raid was winding down. Young then goes down to the local stable called Bedded's Livery Stable, where he knew that there was enough horses for his men, and began to take them. At this moment, the stable owner, he pulls his gun out, puts it right in Young's face, and pulls the trigger 3 times. All 3 times the gun's misfired. Click, 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 all 3 times. Young got away with 22 horses. Now, Young's men, all mounted their horses, began to make their escape back to British Canada, having bagged a cool $208,000, the equivalent of $4.9 million in today's money.
I was about to ask what that would be worth in today's
Well, I
dollars.
have the answer for you, Mary. Before they left, Young saw a local man, wearing a Union uniform and asked if he was a U.S. soldier. When the man said he was, Young ordered him into Taylor Park with the rest of the town's citizens, but the man escaped. He ran into the American House Hotel through the lobby and out the side door. When he was far enough away from capture, this guy yells, "It's a raid! Bring your guns! Start fighting! Dogs and cats living together! Mass hysteria!" Right? The man was Captain George P. Conger, a 48-year-old St. Albans native and veteran of the 1st Vermont Cavalry. Conger raised Company B of the 1st Vermont in April of 1861, and he called him the Ransom Guard. He was at 2nd Manassas, but he resigned his commission at the end of 1863 to tend to his sick wife, Dolly Conger, who was back home in St. Albans.
Oh.
Now, he's going to get an honorable discharge, and he was presented with an officer's saber at his retirement party. We'll talk more about that saber later, because it's a cool part of the story.
Oh, I think I know what you're going to talk about.
Yeah. Before Young ordered his men to ride out of town, he asked them, quote, "Are we all met now?" Meaning, are we all here? And the men yelled, "Yes!" And they began to move. At this point, a local fired a shot at the raiders, and one of them, a guy named Charles Higbee, was shot in the back. He survived, but he was the only Confederate casualty during this raid. Now, Young and his raiders then galloped hard up Main Street, screaming that rebel yell all the way. Now, they didn't burn the town, but they robbed all 3 banks and caused complete mayhem in that sleepy but yet now stunned St. Albans, Vermont. Now, within minutes of Young and his men leaving, Captain Conger had gathered a posse of 50 men to chase down Young and his raiders. Right? These guys had rifles, pistols, pitchforks, whatever they get their hands on.
The Rosewoods clown.
Probably tridents. Who knows what they had, right? But they wanted to get them before they made it over the border. Now, Conger knew Young was likely heading to the border through the town of Sheldon, Vermont, and the posse began their pursuit. So Young, quickly realizing the horses he stole, like I mentioned before, were broken down, and they began to show fatigue almost immediately. So riding to Sheldon, and this is a fun story. This is one of those things it's hard to even believe. But while riding to Sheldon, coming at them down the road, the other direction was a lone horseman by himself who was about to have the unluckiest day of his entire life. Young sees this guy and notices the horse he's riding is a good one, so he stops him and steals his horse. And he's going to give him one of the broken down ones that he was riding. The guy was stunned. I mean, he had no idea of the raid. He had no clue. He's riding into St. Albans, Vermont, when guys in Confederate uniforms steal his horse. I mean, you can only imagine.
Yeah.
So this guy gets on his, quote, new horse, the broken one, and continued towards St. Albans when Conger's posse approached him towards the road. Conger sees the guy on the horse, and he recognizes the horse as one of the ones stolen from St. Albans. So he just starts firing on this guy without saying a word. This poor guy jumps off the horse and runs for his life under fire into the woods, jumps into a nearby alder swamp to hide, where he also had to hide from woods clowns, by the way.
The woods clown.
But he survived the ordeal, but you could only imagine him telling this story at the bar that night in St. Albans. But just think about it. You're in Vermont, you're attacked by Confederate soldiers and fired upon by a Union soldier, you run for your life, no one says why. But that's part of the stories with this. Young and his raiders, they're going to arrive in Sheldon, likely knowing someone was probably pursuing them. So they begin to find ways to stop anyone on their trail. They got to a tributary on the Missisquoi River called Black Creek, which had a covered bridge that allowed people to cross it.
Yep.
At that very moment, Young and his men, while approaching it, a farmer was driving a wagon full of hay, and he happened to be right in the middle of the bridge. It's one of those classic New England little covered bridges, kind of like Sachs Bridge a little bit, right? So Young ordered the men to use whatever Greek fire they had and put it on the wagon. The hay was dry, so it ignited quickly. So Young's raiders rode past it, knowing this fire was going to engulf the bridge and block the pursuit of anyone who was chasing them from St. Albans. But near the bridge, there was a church, and a minister happened to be watching all of this. So he runs down, puts out the fire before it catches the bridge, so Conger's path was still going to be intact without Young realizing it, right? So it's late afternoon now, and Young was feeling better about his escape, thinking he's over the bridge, over the Black Creek. So he rode out into Sheldon, and he noticed that the Missisquoi bank was just a quarter mile from the bridge. He crosses the bridge. He thinks it's burning. Hey, look under the bank. I'm going to get into the bank. Thinking he's going to hit his fourth bank, he walks up to the front door, but it's after hours. The bank is closed. He couldn't rob it. Oh. I guess he didn't realize it was a drive-through ATM in the back he could have probably hit.
Drive-through ATM.
But while here's the thing, another one of these stories about this thing. When he's about to leave the bank, Young looks across the street and he saw a huge house that was owned by locals Alfred and Anna Horton Keith. Now in front of it, Young saw a beautiful black horse tied to a post in the front yard. And he decided he wanted to have the horse. He's going to take the horse. He's of course going to take the horse, right? But what Young didn't know was upstairs in the house was Captain Alfred Keith, the commander of Company K of the 6th Vermont Infantry from John Sedgwick's 6th Corps. Keith was wounded during Emery Upton's assault on the west side of the Mule Shoe at Spotsylvania on May 10th, and he was home on medical discharge from his wound and recovering at his parents' house. The horse belonged to Captain Keith. Young stole Captain Keith's horse. Now, nothing came out of this to threaten Young, but there's a strange side of the story to the Keith family with this. And I don't know if you know this one or not. Captain Keith's uncle was named Rule Keith, and he was an Episcopal minister in Virginia before the war. On June 30th, 1831, Rule Keith traveled on a rainy summer day to Arlington, Virginia, to perform a wedding ceremony of two locals at a mansion overlooking Washington. You know who the locals were? Lieutenant Robert E. Lee, and Mary Custis.
Whoa.
So without knowing it, Bennett Young stole the horse of the nephew of the minister who married the Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
Wow.
It's just one of those
Yeah.
stories you come when you go down rabbit holes, you dig up
Yeah.
these things, you look up who these people are. But it was becoming dark, and Young was near the small village of Enosburg, Vermont, population of around 2,600. It's named for commander of the Vermont forces in the Revolutionary War, Roger Enos. From a nearby hill overlooking the village, something troubled Young because it was late, it was dark. It seemed every light in the town was on and made him nervous because he started to think, well, if these inhabitants of Enosburg got tipped off of St. Albans somehow, they might be waiting to ambush me here. And I have to go through Enosburg to get through. I have to. Because the only way to get through to the Missisquoi River and cross into Canada was to pass through the village. It was the only way. But fortunately for Young and the Raiders, there was no ambush, and Enosburg had no idea of what had happened a few miles south of St. Albans. I mean, news doesn't travel that quick, right? But after crossing the Missisquoi Bridge, Young was going to order the raiders to split up into small groups and continue north over the border. Now, it's around then that one of the unanswered mysteries of the St. Albans Raid has its beginning. The night of the raid, just east of Enosburg along modern-day Route 105, a small farmer was on his property, and he noticed some men burying a bag in a field not far from his farm. When the men left, the farmer did what anybody else would do. He went to the spot and dug it up, right? No one knows exactly what he found, but soon after he dug up the bag, the small farmer, hardly rich by any stretch, somehow built a huge Victorian farmhouse, which still stands today.
Was this the Confederate gold?
Well, did he find some of that? It was never proven, but there's an old saying that if someone comes in a cache, he'll never say, but there'll be signs. And this is one of them. So maybe we should give Josh Gates a call. He can come investigate this one.
Yep.
But that's one of the rumors of the missing cache. Did this farmer find it? Because you have a farmer who's doesn't have much, to live on, and he builds this beautiful Victorian house that you can still visit today, just outside of Enosburg at 105. And he built it with no one knows how we got the money.
Wow.
But when the raiders arrive basically in Franklin, Vermont, at the border, they slowly begin to cross in those small groups, thinking that they were about to cross into British Canada. They're going to be safe, right?
Yep.
What they didn't know was Captain Conger and his 50-man posse were still on his trail and closer than he thought. Conger and his men reached the border, and he pulled the group together to say, hey, what do you want to do here? Because crossing an international border without permission and acting independently on their own accord was against the law. And Conger wanted to remind these men that they were risking getting arrested or worse by the Canadians if they go over this. But you know what he does? He decides to pull together Operation YOLO, and he figured that was his best course of action. So across they went into the light of Tim Hortons and perennial Stanley Cup heartbreak.
Santa's workshop.
He went into Canada, right? The next morning on October 20th, Bennett Young and a handful of his raiders are sitting at a kitchen table of a Canadian farmer just over the border. Conger and his men were looking for them in every house nearby. And Conger himself walked in, found Young sitting at the kitchen table, and arrested him immediately.
Wow, so no Mounties were involved?
No Mounties. But Young stood up, and the two had a literal fist fight in this guy's kitchen in the Canadian farmhouse.
This is like a movie.
Young got the better of him despite being 27 years older. I mean, Young is a kid, literally.
Yeah.
He's 21 years, And Conger gets the better of him and drags him to a nearby wagon. Conger told him he was taking him back to St. Albans to hang him. But Young took another swing at Conger, and he started to run away again. But this time they were able to catch him for good and put him in the wagon. So by morning's end, Conger's posse had caught 14 of these raiders, but 8 of them escaped and never to be heard from again.
Wow.
So Conger and his men, they're on their way back to the U.S. border with their captives now. And this is when the Mounties stopped them. They got stopped by a group of Canadian officials, and they say, what are you doing there?
Do you know that Bobby Orr?
You know that Bob Orr, yeah? But the Canadians told Conger, hey, listen, you have no authority to take the men out of this country. They're going to be taken into custody of the raiders and take them back to Montreal, and they're going to stand trial there. It didn't take long for word of this raid to make its way throughout the northern states, which freaked them all out.
Yeah.
Because they thought this was coming from the beginning. This was the beginning of a wave of attacks now on northern cities coming through Canada. Now, it never happened, but the Lincoln administration was forced to send troops north, like you said earlier,
Yep.
to protect the border, including one of the heroes of Gettysburg here, Mary, General George Stannard, who was brought home to Vermont to command them. And again, this also is creating another wave of tension between the United States government and Great Britain,
Yep.
rekindling the hate that started with the Trent Affair, continued through the blockade stuff,
The Chesapeake
Affair, all these different things. And Washington desperately wanted the St. Albans Raiders to be punished in the United States,
Yep.
but to their dismay, the trial was going to be held in Montreal. Bennett Young and 11 of the Raiders were taken to jail in Montreal, and they all appeared in court for an arraignment on November 2nd of 1864. All of them testified on their own behalf, and they said the same thing. They were like, listen, we're Confederate soldiers on a mission to attack an enemy target in wartime.
Yep.
We're not some kind of whatever. This is a military deal. December 12th, Judge Charles J. Coursel, he decided that the court lacked jurisdiction, and this was clearly a military operation, and most of the raiders were set free, all except 5. The 5 are Marcus Spur, Charles M. Swager, Squire Turner Tevis, William Huntley, and their leader, Bennett Young, would remain in custody under an 1842 treaty between the U.S. and British Canada, which allowed extradition under certain situations. The judge also ordered $87,000 of the stolen bank money to be transferred to a Canadian banker with rebel sympathies. Wink, wink.
Wow.
Young and the 4 others would stand trial for the St. Albans Raid. On December 27th of 1864, the actual trial began. Those raiders earlier freed by Judge Coursel and those who were never captured, they scattered like hell.
Yeah.
Most of them never to be seen again. Thomas Collins, the Irish guy with the big mouth,
Yeah.
he went to Belgium where he became a doctor.
Wow.
That was his history. One of those things, you know. Again, now he's got money for medical school.
Yeah.
Just saying. March 9th of 1865, the court found they had no jurisdiction under the 1842 treaty due to the fact they were combatants of war, so Young and the other 4 raiders were set free. April of 1865, the Canadian government sent Canadian gold notes back to the 3 banks in Albans in lieu of the cash. Most of the cash never made it back to Vermont.
Not surprised by that. And it must have angered the U.S. government as well, the way these guys, they're basically being let off.
But with this, like the ShamWow guy says, Mary, but wait, there's more. The Canadian government used a bad exchange rate to screw the banks too. So what they ultimately got was, after a severe exchange rate thing, so the Canadian banks, there's no record of the money making it to Richmond, right? But the Canadians took their share of it and basically left $120,000 of the funds, about $2.4 million today, was never found, and is the subject of those missing Confederate money TV shows that pop up once in a while.
Yep.
All 3 of the St. Albans Bank eventually went under, thanks to the losses incurred in this raid.
Wow.
Franklin County Bank was closed immediately by its president, Oscar Burton. St. Albans Bank closed in 1866. And the First National Bank actually made it to 1883 before being forced to close. There's no FDIC insurance back then.
Yeah.
So you lose all your cash, that's it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a while ago, as big as the story seems to be like it'd be a great movie, it really wasn't famous until years later. You know why? What was going on October 19th of 64?
Oh, that was Cedar Creek.
The Battle of Cedar Creek was going on that same day.
Was that where the 8th Vermont was?
Right. And there was bigger fish to fry for the Vermonters.
Yep.
Sheridan's victory secured the valley, and it was a much bigger news story than a little bank robbery in Vermont, especially when you have Vermont infantry being part of the heroes.
Yeah.
Bennett Young, the leader of the St. Albans Raid, became a hero in the South. He returned to the United States in 1868, just 3 years after being exiled in Scotland and Ireland. He returns to Louisville, Kentucky. And here, this is an amazing part of it too. At the 50th anniversary of St. Albans Raid in October of 1914, Young was actually invited to return to St. Albans as part of the celebration. He accepted the invitation, but the local politicians said, wait a second. This guy made 3 banks go under. He raided our town. You want to invite him? So you're going to uninvite him. So they uninvited him. So he never made it. When Young appeared at reunions in the South, he was always received a standing ovation. He was forever known as the hero of St. Albans. And here's what's amazing about this, too. It was a covert operation. It was a secret from beginning to the end.
Yeah.
Later in his life, he wrote a book about his cavalry exploits called Confederate Wizards of the Saddle. He does not mention one word of St. Albans Raid in the entire book.
It's so interesting, and again, it goes back to kind of the just how this is something that it's like you hear it mentioned a lot of times. You know, if you study the Civil War, you know the name, but the details are not something that are easily recalled by people just because it doesn't. I don't think it gets studied a lot.
Well, people hear about it. They think it's a couple of slapdicks go themselves in Vermont and they rob a couple of places. But this was an organized deal.
Yeah.
You know, Young is going to die at age 79 in Louisville, Kentucky on February 23rd of 1919. And his gravestone makes no reference to his days with the Confederacy. All it says is, quote, I have kept the faith. That's what his gravestone says. Wow. That's all it says. Does it say Sheridan? You know,
Sheridan?
But Captain George Conger, the man who chased down and captured Young, he died way earlier in 1895, having become a farmer in St. Albans after the war. Remember I mentioned the thing about the saber, the story?
Yeah.
Okay. So earlier in the way, he received a saber that he got when he left the Army in 1862 when his wife Dolly was sick and he went home. An engraving on the scabbard reads, quote, presented to Captain George P. Conger by the officers and privates of Company B, 1st Vermont Cavalry, as a token of respect for him as an officer and a man. September 16th, 1862. It'd be a long sword. Holy moly.
Ew.
George P. Conger left St. Albans after the war. He moved to the town of Georgia, Vermont, after his wife Dolly died in 1867. You know.
Yeah.
1870, he bought a farm on what's now at the corner of Conger Road and Route 7 and is now known as the Conger Farm. There you go. So though George Conger died in 1895, that sword gifted to him by Company B remained in the family long after his death. According to his great-grandson, Colin Conger, the saber was passed on to his son, Stephen Conger, who would in turn eventually give it to his son, stay in the family. Sometime in 1997, the saber, which was kept in a shadow box in the family home when it was owned by George's great-granddaughter, it disappeared.
Wow.
It disappeared faster than the last beer in that fridge when you're around. Gone quick. So Colin Conger began looking for this sword a few years before the 150th anniversary of St. Albans Raid in 2014. It was still missing. His search eventually led him to a guy named Arthur Bell Jr., who was a distant cousin, who was also looking for the sword, because still family.
Yeah.
The two began advertising a reward for this sword's discovery in Civil War-related newspapers. They gave presentations about the raid, talking about if you've seen the sword, it's a beautiful sword. It's exactly what it says on it. The reward they were offering was $500 to return to this sword. Now, it appeared the sword was gone forever. Maybe they should have offered more than $500. Just saying, right?
I was gonna say like.
But here's where you catch a break, okay? And this is what's good about the history world is we have big mouths, right? Bell got info that the sword was sold to an out-of-state Civil War collector, and when the owner, quotation figures, when the owner of the sword died, it was then sold to a Civil War artifacts dealer, okay? You'll never guess who the Civil War artifacts dealer was who had George Conger's sword. The horse soldier in Gettysburg.
I was going to say the horse soldier, yeah.
Colin Conger found out because he was an attendee at a lecture that Colin was giving on the sword, and he remembered seeing it at the horse soldier, and he reached out to him and Bell. Now, Bell, who lived in Baltimore, drove up here to Gettysburg and confirmed by its engravings that it truly was the sword of George P. Conger, and it was no longer missing.
Wow.
The horse soldier said that you can have it back, but it's going to cost you $20,000.
No.
They talked him down to 18, but Conger and Bell eventually bought the sword. I mean, I'm sure they had to pay for it. I mean,
yeah.
You know, but Conger and Bell then donated the sword to the St. Albans Museum, and they both felt that their relative's sword should be seen by all those in St. Albans who wanted to learn about its history versus being held by a private collector. So if you go to the museum, you can go see the sword.
That's very cool.
Now, go back. In the end, St. Albans Raid captures the imagination, even to this day, because of the manner it was executed, the chaos it created, and where it was done. People in the North, especially New England, always felt insulted. Insulated, that the war was so far away in the South. But on October 19th, 1864, the Civil War came home to the small town of Vermont. And they still talk about up there. Remember, it's 500 miles to the south of Cedar Creek on that same day.
Yeah.
Vermonters were helping Sheridan's army finally clear the valley. So that date of October 19th is always going to hold a special place in the hearts of the earthy, crunchy people of Vermont. And it's true. If you go up there, you'd be happy to talk about it. But St. Albans Raid is one of those events in American history that it's perfectly made for a movie.
Oh, yeah.
And Bennett Young is a good-looking guy. He's one of the most attractive guys in the Confederacy. He's got the whole thing going, and he was somebody who pulled this thing off because of being a teenager, being trained by John Hunt Morgan, and he was a perfect disciple. And if John Hunt Morgan were alive and everything was going on like this, he would have been very impressed with the raid that young Bennett Young did.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, too, to note kind of the reaction of the United States government to this, particularly the trial. Seward was said, U.S. Secretary of State William Seward said, "It is impossible to consider these proceedings as either legal, just, or friendly towards the United States." So he was none too happy with how things went down. And in Europe, the news of the raid and the subsequent speculation of war between Britain and the U.S. increased as well. But it also caused the price of Confederate gold bonds to go up too, because there was so much instability around it. And also, as an unintended consequence, the raid will turn many Canadians against the Confederacy as well, because they felt that Canada was being drawn into the conflict without its consent. And there was no further raids made after this. But then again, you have to remember the Civil War, when this raid is made, has less than a year left to go. When these guys are being tried on, March the 9th, 1865, that's 1 month before Appomattox.
Yeah, when these guys were basically, when Young was finally released, it was April of 65, so it's just about over. But the fear that it caused, it absolutely did. Because I can only imagine that poor horseman riding up that road, probably half asleep. It's Vermont, so he's probably hammered. And he sees Confederate. Imagine seeing Confederates. It'd be like going on the street and seeing space aliens coming at you. The last thing he expected.
Well, we did at the Halloween parade.
No, that's true, probably. But it's a great story with a bunch of, I don't want to say seedy characters, but it was by a bunch of characters who basically did what they did. This idea comes up with the fact he's caught at Steubenville. Comes up with this idea while at Camp Douglas, pitches it, and he's still young. He's still 20 years old at the time, and he ends up getting this whole thing done. Not a lot of people know the name Bennett Young.
No.
Because he's not somebody who's an A-lister in American history. Even some of the deep gray Confederate people we know probably don't know that name, but it's because it's overshadowed by Cedar Creek.
Yeah.
But again, when he was still alive, his contemporaries felt he was a hero. Like I said, he always got a standing ovation, and he lived a while too.
Yep.
And it's too bad he didn't go back to St. Albans for that 50th reunion, because I would imagine that would have been a crazy experience.
That would have been really interesting, and I think it just goes back to how some of these guys are viewed in their own time versus today. That they get lost kind of in the, I don't want to say historical memory, but someone like Bennett Young is very famous in his day. But today, if you were to say the name, do you know who Bennett Young is? I can guess a lot of people, they'd be like, who is that?
Yeah, and that's a good thing about studying history, though, is people like this are brought back alive again. Yeah. You can talk about them. And I'm a New Englander, so everybody knows Bennett Young in New England. He's just he's one of those people. Yeah. But it's just one of those fascinating people to study. And I'm glad we finally did this one, because it's one of my favorite Civil War stories. And it was one of my first Civil War stories I ever learned, so it's easy to dust off the cobwebs and remember the story. But hopefully people appreciate it. If you ever get a chance to go to Vermont, and it's just outside of between Burlington and Montpelier in the Canadian border. If you hit Franklin, you've gone too far. But a lot of the buildings are still there. You can go see exactly where Young came out of his hotel. You can see exactly where Taylor Park is. You can see all the same buildings. And you can go see the sword.
That's very cool.
Go his presentation sword. So I guess we can drop them here and give the land of Ben and Jerry's a break for the rest of the night. So what's coming up for us?
So we have to sit down at the old headquarters and talk about what our next couple of episodes are going to be and release a date for those. hopefully we will be back doing a YouTube live stream with y'all soon. We got stuff going on this weekend, so we won't be around for that. Next weekend is Remembrance Weekend here in Gettysburg. And on, I believe it is Saturday, November 15th. Am I getting that correct, Darren?
What's that?
The trivia?
It is. It's Saturday of Remembrance Day weekend, 10 o'clock in the morning, over at our friends at Getty's Gear. So, but come by at 10. It's gonna be a great day over there too, Mary. So you have the trivia at 10, the parade's at 1, and then you can come back to Getty's Gear at 3 o'clock. Our friend Nick Mitch, the musician's playing. He's maybe the best musician in town, and you can dance the night away.
Yes, and it is, just to confirm, it is Saturday, November 15th at 10 o'clock over at Getty's Gear. While you're there, you can get some of our cigars, too, and some of their awesome coffee.
Oh, good people, good people. You know, Carrie and Janet, and of course, Kat. They'll be dancing to Nick, having a great old time, and hopefully we'll be there with them. I'm sure we will.
The Remembrance Parade is, I believe it is at 1 o'clock next Saturday as well, so if you're in town, you can watch that as well. The beer garden over next to Farnsworth House is a great spot, as well as Dobbin House is along the route as well. So I think that's all we have for tonight. So I think we can sign off there.
We're dropping here. So any final words from the Fincher?
No, thank you for bringing it like you always do. I'm glad we finally got to talk about St. Albans Raid, and it was one of the ones that we thought after we did the episode about Canada, well, we really have to do an episode about that. One of the other ones that we talked about doing after we did our Canadian episode was about the Chesapeake Affair, which is in a way similar to the Trent Affair, but in some ways it might be a little bit more controversial as well, given what happened. So we will probably be doing an episode about the Chesapeake Affair at some point as well.
Don't throw me with a good time. We'll have fun with that. All right, so off we go. Everybody have a great rest of the weekend. Remembrance Day weekend is around the corner. Have a safe weekend this weekend, and we will hopefully see you in Gettysburg. Again, come to Getty's Gear on Saturday. There's a whole great weekend going on here. The parade is fantastic. It is a fantastic weekend here in town, and we'll look forward to seeing you all, including you, Fincher, on the other side.
See y'all later.
Peace out.
Bye.